Okay, well, looking at transparency, let's just kind of look there. Essentially, the three main ideas, and I guess technically are four things that happen. It's the intersection of shape and space that creates transparency on the one hand. Then on the other hand, it's really about the relationship between hue, value, and saturation. So three things that you see have played a pretty strong role throughout the term. So I brought up here the Munsell color system, and just so you take a look at that. And you recall we looked at that very early on in the term. And essentially the idea, let's scale down a little bit here, is on the center axis we go from dark to light. Think again about your value scale in the very beginning, and we had the value keys of medium, light, and dark. And then we had our color wheel where we went around and we established primary, secondary, intermediate, or tertiary colors. And then we talked about saturation, whereby a color that has maximum saturation, and as it has gray added to it, it lowers its saturation. Or if we were to take that color and add in the color across from it, would also lower the saturation. So we really kind of talked about basically creating a notion of creating variety with the color. So the transparency is all about how you use one of those three things, either lowering the saturation through the complement of the color, through adding a corresponding gray to the color, or rather not you use the primary, secondary, intermediate relationship. And so that's pretty much how we make the illusion of the transparency happen. Let's take a look at a couple. Let's see, let's go here. Oops, sorry. Okay. And take a look. And we see here on a hue relationship, as you, if we go from the left side, you see my mouse at the top, we have the relationship between green and yellow at an intersecting point, and the yellow plays the parent color throughout in each of the interactions. So here we have yellow with green, and as we move around the color wheel, and the distance is determined by the more green the color is and the more green's on top of the yellow. You notice we never actually have a flat green, because that would then create less distance between the colors and illusion of the transparency. But as we add yellow, the yellow goes to the top. So as the parent color, or as the dominant color, the more of that color is, the more that you get the illusion of the transparency. So these are actually painted squares. They're not to give you the illusion of the median transparency. And the next, we have a lowered saturation. We're bringing in the yellow and the purple together, and as we mix in here in the first grouping, we see the purple being closer. As more yellow comes in, we see a lower saturated yellow, but not as low as the very first lower yellow here. And then let's look at the red intersecting point. You notice again, you barely see the far left because it is far more to the red side. So you get a little bit of an interaction play there with the red-orange on the red. As you move and the orange becomes more of a yellow-orange, you see the middle one being the strongest transparency here. And as the yellow falls to the top, you see somewhat of transparency, not quite as strong as you saw in the others. You see really the yellow-green relationship is pretty strong transparency-wise. When you compare that to value, and you go through and look at the value relationship. Sorry. Let's get back to our, okay. And we look at that, and we see that as we think back to your value scale, and as we add the lighter key to the black, and think of this as like your number 8 step in the value scale, and then a number 5, number 4, and so on. So you think of these as definite steps in value, and they're giving you the illusion of the transparency just through their value change. This is more about the use of black and white. But you notice the key thing here, as I said, the three things are, if we can again remember what they were, that we want to talk about saturation, hue relationship, and value. And so in this case we have value and then the overlapping. So that overlapping is a real key component to pushing the illusion. Again here I have, we talk about that, the degree of space happening. With this one you'll see I have more of a yellow-green, so you've got the yellow sitting on top of the blue. When I have more of a green, the transparency is not as strong as you see on either side of the top and the bottom of this particular interaction. So when I create a middle color, I'm going to create more of a shade area and less of a transparency. It appears that the blue is on top here, but it's actually fairly close to the yellow, a little bit more ambiguous. Here, when we go in, we see the yellow and we see more of a blue. In fact, the blue reads a bit more like a lighter change in value, but you do get the transparency. So of the three, the top one gives us the greatest sense of transparency, and depending upon that color relationship, they do change to varying degrees. So I put this one up just to kind of show and look at when I take away the overlapping shape, you see the transparency really changes. The way we perceive the we can still see a sense of transparency, but it's not as great with the overlapping shape. You know, again, we see the idea of the red. Let's bring that in. And that sort of notion of how this band of color gives us a sense of having change as it meets these areas of the design. When we meet purple and yellow, a little bit low saturated here for the red to give us the illusion of the intersecting points. Okay, and then here we have a hue relationship, but we've lightened the value. We have two very light values. You want to have some distinction in value, so the course unit talked about being aware of the value relationship. So you want to try to ensure that you have distinction of those intersecting points and their values. So here I have a medium and a lighter color and an intersecting color. I can add white to it and create that lighter value. So that's one of the things that we can look at those intersecting points, is not only creating a mixture, but also adding a tint or shade to the intersecting point. We'll also talk about the degree of relative distance. So just to really quickly go back, what determines that intersecting point? Either it's the mixing of a color one across from the other on the color wheel to make neutral, lower saturation, or lowering saturation through adding in a gray, or using black, white, or gray for intersecting point, or using the hue relationships of intersecting where perhaps a primary meets a secondary and has an intermediate color intersecting point. So, and then of course if it's a blue-green meeting, then the blue-green would be on top of the yellow, and so on. So we think about how the intermediate relationship will determine the spatial distance of one color to the next. So, all right, so that's a pretty simple concept. You know, I think all of these, the Bezold and the ones we've talked about so far, they really revolve around the notion of saturation and hue and value So again, very simple concepts, but you can see they give us a really limitless number of interesting possibilities to change the color dynamics. All right?